Hello, hello, and welcome to Hot Take Think Tank. I'm Kier.
And I'm Liam. Today we'll be discussing what really took down Airbnb in New York City, why a certain group of people think betting could change the world, whether fabricating trauma for laughs has become more acceptable, and what to do with the racial roles that social justice culture has created. But first, Kier, I hear you have some good news.
Yes, the Writers Guild has ratified a new contract, and 99% of the voting Writers Guild members voted to ratify the contract.
Wow.
Which is incredible.
It must be a good contract, I guess.
It's a great contract. A lot of what was won, the studio executives said was simply impossible, that they would never, ever in a million years be able to get this type of contract. There's new staffing minimums for writers' rooms, bigger cuts of streaming residuals, wage increases, better professional development opportunities for new writers. There's increased job security, more timely payments, more data transparency, as well as AI restrictions that are designed to protect human labor.
Yeah, that's a great list. I do actually, I heard one additional detail about the AI regulation that's in there, which I found pretty interesting. It's essentially that the studios are not allowed to use AI to write anything, but it places no restrictions on the writer's ability to use AI to do their writing, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's not like no AI will ever be used in the writing of anything for the studios. It's like you have to trust the professionals who know how to write to use this new tool to write more or write better.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because I feel like since ChatGPT came out and everything, like there are all these videos on like how to get rich quick with ChatGPT. And so all of these, there's a science fiction website that had to like shut down submissions because they were just filled with all of this total garbage written by ChatGPT. So yeah, the quality control part will always require humans for sure.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and I liked it too. I was a bit worried, like just hearing how often AI was mentioned, that it was sort of like a Luddite anti-technology thing, but this seems a lot more reasonable. It's like, yes, there's room for the new tech in the contract. It's just a reasonable use of the new tech, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That does seem to be the way to go. Instead of trying to fight it all together, is trying to figure out how to incorporate it in a way that doesn't screw people over.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good news.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of getting screwed over, Liam, I'm wondering if you have ever had like a terrible Airbnb experience.
Yes, I have. It was on I did a road trip across Canada, and we did a few Airbnbs like right on the West Coast on the island and that were all really nice. And I was like really trusting Airbnb at that point. It was like the first few times, it was like my first 2 or 3 stays. I was like, this is amazing. And so it was in Revelstoke where my trust maybe was too high, and I booked a place because it was really cheap, without checking any reviews. And it was like we slept on like a piece of foam on top of like an unfinished floor, like just plywood.
Oh, wow.
And it was a house where every room was a separate Airbnb. And if I remember correctly, there was just one shower downstairs. And like no organized system around that shower, just sort of like, if you want to shower, good luck. I don't know. There must have been maybe a dozen people staying in that house, all just sleeping on the floor. And it was terrible. We slept very poorly. It just like security wise, it felt bad. And we did the rookie move of getting there after dark, which always just makes wherever you stay feel like a little spooky.
A little more sinister.
Exactly. Yeah. So, the rest of the trip, we checked the reviews before booking Airbnbs.
I mean, it sounds like you paid for a squat. That's what that sounds
Pretty
like.
much. Yeah, we maybe could have found an abandoned building and had a nicer night. Like breaking the window and crawling in there. It was wild. It was very, yeah. It was squatting. That's really what it felt like. But like it wasn't even free.
Amazing. Wow. Yeah, I feel like the stories have piled up over the years about Airbnb because one of its main things, it really just is the inconsistency, right? It's sort of like deregulated the hotel experience in a lot of ways. So
yeah, I don't think you could operate a hotel where the floors weren't finished.
No.
I think you would get shut down if you did that.
That's probably against the rules.
Probably, yeah. But yeah, Airbnb was the Wild West and still sort of is.
It still sort of is, but maybe the tide is turning because Anne Lowry just wrote an Atlantic article entitled "What Really Took Down Airbnb." And this is about how New York City has recently introduced new rules on short-term leases, which Airbnb has referred to as a de facto ban. And it has brought down the number of Airbnb units in New York City from 39,000 to 405. So that's a significant increase for New York City's long-term rental stock. And basically, Airbnb owners have to register with the city before they can be paid. And unless they reside in the same unit, apartments have to be rented for a minimum of 30 days.
Right.
So it's a big change.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and Lowry went on to say that Airbnb came into being during this is a quote, by the way, Airbnb came into being during the last great American housing crisis, one very different from today's. Millions of Americans had become homeowners, putting little money down on properties they could not really afford. When those homeowners started missing mortgage payments, real estate values dropped and a global economic depression ensued. This housing cataclysm planted the seeds for the next. The real estate crash depressed the building of new housing, which is remarkably still taking place at a lower level than it was during the Bush years, when there were 30 million fewer Americans.
Yeah.
That really surprised me, that the depression in construction seems to be ongoing this many years after the Great Recession.
Totally. It's I mean, the housing crisis, right? It's a really poorly, the system's not working in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, I don't know. I thought it was an interesting article. I feel a bit like Airbnb is like a very small part of the housing crisis problem.
Yes.
And it's sort of, I don't know. And in some ways with like the current tide of like the anti-tech vibes these days, it feels almost like a politically easy piece of legislation to pass to try and address like a big issue, maybe in a way that I'm not sure if it'll be that effective. But what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that's, Lowry's kind of getting at that. In the sense that, yes, Airbnb has been shown to increase rental and real estate prices. That is a real thing. And last year, the number of short-term Airbnb apartments in New York City outnumbered the available long-term rentals. Okay,
wait. Okay, sorry. Because I had earlier in the article started like checking some numbers, and I think that is a phrase that is misleading. Can I give you my read on what she's saying there and what I first thought she was saying? Okay, so so I looked up, there were 39,000 Airbnbs in New York City. And I looked up how many households there were in Airbnb or in New York City. And it's 3.2 million. So it's about 1% Airbnbs. So I'd already checked that, and I was like, how could that long-term rental thing possibly be true? Right, because it's not like there's only 1% long-term rentals, I was thinking. So I think what that phrase is getting at, there were more apartments available to rent on Airbnb in the city than there were available to rent long-term. I think that is referring to like currently available to rent, not places that are rented already, which to me, I don't know. It's like you'd sort of expect short-term rentals to be easier to rent than long-term rentals because long-term rentals are off the market when they're rented. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Whereas like an Airbnb is always available to rent, but if someone's in like a 12-month contract that they renew, then that's not going to be available to rent. Mm-hmm. That's all. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I thought that was important context.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think like because she is saying that although Airbnb does have an effect, that the main issues are a dearth of housing stock, there's just not enough housing, and also an unaffordability crisis, and that those are like the main culprits, right? Airbnb is not helping, but it is not the main culprit. And I think it's interesting to think of like what type of business Airbnb is, right? And Lowry talks about that, how these sort of disruptor companies, they launch a startup that violates a law because you already in New York City were not supposed to be doing rentals under 30 days, but it was not being enforced. Then because they're violating a law, they have an advantage over the competitors. Because, as you said, a hotel wouldn't be able to put you on foam in an unfinished room. And then once the company grows big enough, it can demand that politicians clarify the laws, by which they mean legalize the business practices of that company. So that's something that we've seen happen in various industries at this time. So I did feel like the article's title was like a little bit clickbaity, you know, because it was saying, the government didn't take down Airbnb, the housing crisis did. Well, no, the housing crisis caused the government to regulate Airbnb.
Totally.
Right?
It was not the housing market. It was the government trying to fix the housing market via regulation. That's a government thing. And like a housing market could, in theory, take down Airbnb, right? If somehow the pricing that the market set wasn't viable to do Airbnbs in. But that's not what happens.
So I felt like because of the title, I was waiting. I was like, what did take down Airbnb? What will it be? What's the big reveal? And then it was exactly what I thought it was going to be.
Totally, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, Lowry says near the end that in an utterly different housing market, Airbnb could have been a good idea, but not in this one. And I do think that, you know, the business model is an awful fit given the compounding pressures right now on the housing market. And although it's not the sole cause, it's certainly not helping.
No, it's probably fair. I would also not be too surprised if it varies city to city. Like some cities, Airbnb's benefits outweigh the other ones, but not New York City.
How do you think that could be in another place?
Like a city that has plentiful housing stock and
so nowhere in Canada.
Tourism industry.
Okay.
Or I don't know, or like there are some places that have little going on other than tourism. That I think are mostly supported through things like Airbnb. Like it does allow some small towns to have tourism that kind of couldn't have any before. For like a place that's not big enough to get any chain to set up a hotel there.
Right.
That sort of thing. I think it's possible for Airbnb to be nice. Well, and there is one other way that Airbnb, in theory, could be positive. Because I do think the core problem with the housing market is supply constraints, right? Like that there's just way more demand for housing than there are houses, and so that makes the price for houses go really high. And like you said, like there's still a depressed market in building new houses. So, like, it seems to me like at some point a lot of money needs to be invested in houses, like in building new places, and that being able to make money from those units as Airbnbs could help incentivize investors to build
but
more
then
apartments.
but then you haven't solved the problem. Like if you have all these local renters, low income renters that can't find a place, then how does that end up like solving the problem that we have in the first place, which is that people can't find places to rent?
Well, it's just if Airbnb could, I think, be a part of the like broad pitch to investors to build a ton more housing, and a ton more housing could bring prices down across the board because demand and supply would be more in line with each other.
I don't know. I guess I feel skeptical of that because like
yeah, I knew you would.
well, like, and why hasn't that happened yet? If that were to happen, like, because Airbnb has been around for quite a while at this point.
No, I mean, I think it could be about as big a part of the solution as it is currently part of the problem.
Okay.
Like not like a huge thing. I think that there's a lot of things that drive up the cost of building new housing. Chief among them maybe like zoning laws, that sort of thing, that like make it so it's like a very long process and you might not ever get there if you want to build like dense housing in a neighborhood, even if you like have acquired the land that you'd like that housing to go on.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not like obviously Airbnb isn't going to save the housing market. I just think it's I'm not entirely convinced it's like getting rid of it is like long term a boon to the housing market. But I agree, like the short term pain of adding some more units, about 1% more units to the market, probably for the best. I guess I hope that one day the housing market can be like good enough that they can allow it back. Wouldn't that be nice to have a housing market so like well run that it can have Airbnb and it doesn't cause problems?
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, absolutely, because it has caused so much tension, between different segments of the population in so many cities. And that's interesting. I mean, I know in Canada that like Canada basically like housing wasn't available as a commodity for a long time, and it was just through like a series of laws that like it became an attractive investment.
Yeah, like a speculation vehicle kind of thing.
Yeah. So I think my like aspirations are more removing housing as a commodity because it is a public good, and I think there are better ways to provide public goods than relying on the market to kind of figure it out. But yeah, that's definitely a long-term hope. So
totally. Yeah. I don't think either of us are have any total solution here.
No.
But it doesn't sound like either of us are fully convinced that getting rid of Airbnb is a big move, although probably it'll help some people.
Yeah.
What do you think of like the argument that it might also hurt some people? Not so much the ones who buy several apartments and turn them into like the cookie cutter Airbnbs, but like the people who were just marginally able to get a mortgage and meet those mortgage payments through renting on Airbnb.
Well, my understanding in Canada is like the idea of like the mom and pop landlords is largely false. It's a very tiny percentage of landlords.
Very like professionalized. It's
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. At this point, we have large corporations that own thousands and thousands and thousands of houses that they rent out.
Interesting.
Yes, and they're also like you can invest, right, and own whatever percentage
your share of
exactly. So I think that largely the idea that of course there are landlords that they're just renting out. But that's the thing, actually, is that these provisions allow you to rent out a room in your primary domicile. So
right, but for a minimum of 30 days, I think.
I think that's an exception. Like if it's in your own domicile, it can be for less than 30 days.
Interesting.
That's how I was reading that.
Yeah, cool.
Unless they reside in the same unit, apartments have to be rented for a minimum of 30 days. So I think there is actually a little bit of protection
cool. So
for
those people will be fine.
Yeah, I think those people will be fine.
That totally puts the lie to the idea that that's a big thing, though. If there's only 400 registered Airbnbs after the regulation, that means the other 38,500 were, not that.
Yeah, exactly. Or they didn't want to do the paperwork, or they haven't yet, or various things.
But if it was like, if you were on the edge and you wouldn't make your mortgage payments, you probably would have done the paperwork.
You would do the paperwork, right. Yeah. So I think that's a good point, that number kind of points to the idea that there are very few kind of just very small businesses that are relying on those payments.
Like the romantic part of Airbnb as a business would be that it's like, it doesn't hurt the housing market. It helps by, letting people who couldn't afford to buy housing buy it. But no, 400 people in the city maybe. So good for them. But probably not worth keeping the whole thing around for.
Exactly. Yeah. If 100,000 people can now find housing in New York City, then it might be worth it. So, Liam, do you think we'll see similar rules in Canadian cities that drastically reduce the number of Airbnbs?
I was wondering if you'd ask something like that, because Vancouver pretty much has this already.
Oh, interesting.
We've never had Airbnbs in the way that a city like New York had. We've always had basically the same thing of you can only rent out if it's your primary residence. And I think there's like a maximum number of days a year you can do it too. So even if it is your primary residence, it can't be year long. And I think most buildings in Vancouver, the ones that are like part of stratas or homeowner association, I think is what they call it in the States, they almost all have rules against Airbnb or short-term rentals. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if this spreads though to any city that doesn't have it and is having a housing crisis. Sort of like I said at the top, I think it's like very politically palatable, and it's a huge crisis that everyone wants people, their politicians just to do something about, right? So
absolutely.
This seems like it might go all over the place.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's like one of the really sad realities of like the situation in Canada is that you have, many members of older generations whose entire like wealth and retirement savings are like contingent on the property that they own, right? And yet at the same time, if we want the younger generations to be able to ever be property owners, the prices need to come down. So you have like this real material tension between two groups that have opposing interests, and the politicians are drawn from one of those groups much more so than the other. So it's hard, it's hard to picture a significant change. So if they can say, we're tackling Airbnb, it can sound like they're doing something for housing, and they are, but it's a lot
on the margins. Totally.
Exactly, it's a much smaller move than like what's available to them if they really wanted to change the housing market in Canada. Yeah,
totally. And it doesn't seem like there's much. Well, I don't know, actually. It feels like there's been a bit of a shift lately where like, I don't know what the graph would look like, but I feel like the words housing crisis have gotten a lot more common, sort of like through all the political parties. So maybe something big will happen, but it's true. It would be very hard for politicians to justify anything that would like actually like drop the house prices dramatically, because that would make so many people mad.
And anything short of that is not going to do that much to shift like who can buy houses, right? Like that's
it's all along the margins other than that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's getting to the crux of it, and that really is like, which group do you stand behind? And they're both, very, very large and and have like significant like material reasons to be on the side that they're on.
Yeah, totally. This is making me. I want to look it up sometime, like how big those various cohorts are. I'm not sure, like what the renter to homeowner ratio is anywhere, really. Maybe that'll be a future quiz. Not this episode, though.
That sounds good.
Cool. All right. Well, maybe we'll move to the next article then. entitled "The Wager That Betting Can Change the World." It's an article by Kevin Roos, published in the New York Times, about a conference he attended about prediction markets. The conference itself sounds pretty wild. He described it as part Math Olympiad and part Burning Man. And the idea that has all these people very excited is that prediction markets can, they say, help find good information and weed out bad information, which is a problem that lots of people worry about these days. The markets let you bet on anything, like will Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg have a physical fight in 2023? Will Ukraine regain control of Crimea? And it lets users gain reputation based on how often they get things right. I didn't get the impression that Kevin came away like convinced by these people. It felt almost like an anthropological kind of article. But I thought maybe I'd start by laying out how prediction markets work, just for context.
Yeah, that sounds great. This was a really new idea to me before reading this article. The idea
That's interesting.
that there are sites where you can just bet on literally any event that can be boiled down into a simple, like, it does happen or it doesn't happen.
Totally. Yeah. Whereas I have known about betting markets for a good long while, and I like them a lot. When I saw you post send this article, I was like, that one's going on the list. I love this stuff.
Awesome. Tell us about it.
Okay. So, like the name suggests, a prediction market is a market. So there's buying and selling. And what's being sold is ownership of these weird little contracts. And the contract basically has like 3 points. It says this contract will either pay out $1 or $0. Whether it pays out or not will be determined by, say, who wins an election or whatever it is you're betting on. And whoever owns this contract, at the date that the outcome can be determined, gets the payment. So that is what's actually being traded on these markets, is like a contract that says this is worth $1 if you're right. And so what happens then is it's a market with buyers and sellers, and there's incentive. Say you think there's a 50% chance of the contract paying out, right? The election's going to go to the person you think will win. You got a 50% chance at this $1. That means if someone is willing to sell you a contract for 49 cents, you should buy it because you think it's worth more than that, right? You think on average it's going to pay 50 cents. And in the other direction, you would sell your contract for 49 cents. No, wait. Sorry, I got confused there. It's like if you think it's 50%, then you're willing to pay anything less than 50 cents, and you're willing to sell for anything more than 50 cents because you think that buyer is like overvaluing the likelihood that it's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. So the idea, what I think is cool about them, I guess, or the idea of them, is that this like pricing mechanism, overall, you get to observe like what is the price that this contract is going for. And that sort of implies what the average dollar invested in the market believes the odds are, right? If everyone was 100% sure that the thing was going to happen, the price would go all the way up to $1 because that's because it's going to happen. Whereas if it is not going to happen, no one will be willing to pay anything for the contract because it's not going to happen. And so in theory, you can make money off of these markets by knowing more than other people know, or by like working harder to determine like what the true price should be. So that's what a prediction market is.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think so.
Have you ever participated in one?
No, actually. I might. I'm not opposed to gambling, but I mostly watch them because I think they, well, like it goes into in the article, the I don't agree with everything that these people at this conference say. I think they overstate a lot of it, but I do think it's an interesting sort of counterbalance to like punditry, where I probably check the betting markets most before an election comes comes out, because I am interested in like the odds that one person will win or another, and the betting markets have sort of a different incentive structure than like political punditry, where a pundit might, they might harbor some biases or something, right, that make them overstate the odds of something. Whereas in the market, there's no incentive to, like, the incentive is to be correct right. a lot more pure way than the talking heads on TV or podcasters, for instance.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like putting your money where your mouth is, right? Like, totally. In the most real sense of that. Yeah,
it's like, oh, you think that the prediction, you think that the polls are all wrong and that, Biden is a shoo-in for re-election or whatever. It's like, if you are really convinced of that, you could make a lot of money by putting all your life savings into the prediction market, because right, and then if you're right, you'll be richer. But most people, I don't know, most people, probably us included, talk with a lot more confidence than is deserved, and if we get like asked to make a wager on something, we suddenly start reeling back our certainty, I think.
That's true. I guess I had a couple questions about this. Like,
sure.
One is like when the article talks about like how these people think that this type of betting can change the world, like what are they picturing? Like how exactly is it about it like influencing public policy, or is it about like figuring out like who is the most trustworthy, or like what's the mechanism there?
I'm not so sure. It kind of gets the vibes of like people who know statistics and did shrooms, and it all fit together in their brain.
We've got it figured out, man, but like can't actually tell you how. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's like they were saying, wait, there was a little section that I put a bunch of notes on because, okay, yeah, lots of silliness. Okay, yeah, it says like businesses would track prediction markets to figure out which products to build or which competitors to worry about. And my thought is like we have a stock market already.
Right.
Governments would lean on prediction markets, not polls or lobbyists, to figure out which policies to pursue. And I'm thinking like we have elections.
Yes, that line struck me as so interesting because my first thought was like, oh, that's amazing. Like lobbyists, is a very strange kind of undertaking that can affect things that kind of go against public good. But at the same time, like, would lobbyists not figure out, and other interests with large budgets not figure out how to influence these betting markets, right?
I mean, like markets can definitely be manipulated. Like there's lots of laws about that for actual markets.
Right. Like what would kind of safeguard these markets so that they're this pure source of information as opposed to all of these other, ways that we can learn things and make decisions.
Totally. No, it's like all of the markets, I think I could confidently say all of the markets are at some point underpinned by like a real economy good of some sort. That's sort of what makes them makes it worth people making them efficient, is that right, like the market for used cars or something has like buyers and sellers and they negotiate over prices, and that's how the prices get set. But at the end of the day, there's a car getting traded. The idea that like anyone would invest significant money in these markets for, just for, I don't know, like that. It wasn't at all clear to me, like why, who's the person who's like going to spend 40 hours a week doing spreadsheets to make money on these markets. And then there's also the glaring issue that I feel like was not addressed enough, that it's currently all fake money.
Right.
Or points, you could call them, which I think really skews skews everything way, way more, just because it's like you're no longer even putting your money where your mouth is. You're putting meaningless internet points where your mouth is. You know what I mean?
Well, that really undercuts the argument that they're making that like these bets are, you know, they kind of have this built-in accountability because people are putting real money, but they're not. Yeah. So
no, I mean, there are betting markets in the world, mostly in areas that already have betting. Like there's sports betting markets these days, instead of like having a bookie who determines the odds for everything. Usually odds get determined by a market instead. But there's not like there's people like betting on sports because they like watching sports and they want to, you know, heighten the experience or whatever. But why you'd bet on just random like policy decisions? I don't know.
That kind of reminds me of my other question, which is that like, does someone's ability to predict outcomes actually speak to their intelligence or their capability?
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it's like
totally.
It could certainly be considered a skill, but does that actually make that person more trustworthy, that person should be listened to, etc.? Because
totally,
I think that, you know, when it comes to researchers or journalists or whomever, you know, they're working with like what we actually have and what we know and what we have studies on. And so for me, like I don't find someone who accurately predicts things like inherently more trustworthy than someone who is accountable to telling us when they were wrong about something, you know? And I think really smart and capable people are wrong about things. And that's just part of the process. That's part of being a human. And that's the nature of the future, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. I did find like a weird focus in this article, because what I like about a betting market is that it's like the sum of hopefully a huge number of like individuals all making bets and like a wisdom of the crowds sort of thing. But this article did keep coming back to like that some people can like gain influence and be like, look at how many predictions I've gotten right. You should trust me on this new thing, which to me is I don't find that particularly interesting. I know there's like this cohort that where they are like competitive forecasters, which I think is pretty cool, but like it's total nerd stuff. Like just they're really good at spreadsheets and like finding data sets that are like reasonable analogies for the current situation. And it's definitely a skill. Like some people are much better at coming up with models that forecast the future than others. But I don't know. Yeah, I think I'd be with you. Like I think that those people have their place, and it's probably an important place, but I don't think it's necessarily every place. I think that there's lots of, you know, like, are they also good like orators to win elections? Probably not. Or whatever it might be.
Exactly. Are they policy wonks? Like it's an interesting skill. It's a particular skill, you know, but how does it translate? And I understand, like, after the incredible difference between the polling in the Trump versus Clinton election versus the outcome, that there was sort of like this whole reckoning around the idea of polling and like, what is it even worth if it could be so wrong, you know? And you do have to wonder how like different incentives came in, like not even necessarily consciously, like that there was a conspiracy to say that Clinton was going to win, but just that so many people in the media industry were convinced that that would be the outcome. That's what they told everybody, right? And and I could like seeing that happen. You do, I guess. I wonder how much this conference, like, you could like go back in time and see that this conference comes from that specific event, because it's true. Like on the eve of that election, there were places that said Trump had like a 1% chance, right? That happened. Exactly.
I did notice one election forecaster who I follow and am a fan of, Nate Silver apparently did talk at this conference.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and he was one of the people who gave Trump the highest odds. I think around 30% the night before the election, which is interesting. He was sort of an outlier, and people thought that it was way too high, but that ended up being what happened.
Well, that's what I found intriguing about the article, is like, if it is shown over time that these markets do more often than, say, public polling, you know, produce accurate results or like point in the direction of the outcome. That's really interesting. But again, like the idea that that this betting market should play some large role in public policy or in you know, government legislation, that's a huge leap beyond that, right?
I do feel like there was also this like undercurrent in the article about like this somehow solving like misinformation. Which seems wild to me, because it's like the idea that anyone who's spreading misinformation would participate in this sort of thing.
Right.
I don't know. I don't think like QAnon people are like, I believe this and I want to bet money on it. Like, I don't think that is how that conversation would go.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know. I guess I think it would be cool if these betting markets were made to be more legalized in a reasonable fashion, just so we could like see how they do. That could be cool.
I mean, I think that perhaps for things outside of political elections, because I think the idea of like, being able to bet on political elections, like I think we just have to be careful about introducing incentives, right? That could lead to like coercion or just like introduce sort of corrupt practices into people's voting habits.
Yes. And another one they mentioned in the article is bets on when people will die, because they don't want to incentivize assassinations, which is, I'm glad they thought of that. Yeah, that's true. Good thinking.
Yes, I think that's what you got to be cautious around, is like, whether you end up incentivizing behaviors by accident or on purpose.
Ooh. I thought it was another one of those articles where I'm not like convinced that this is going to change the world or anything. But I do think it's interesting stuff to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree for sure. Well, Liam, I have a question for you.
Oh, yeah?
I do. When you go to a comedy show, do you expect the comedian to more or less be telling the truth?
Interesting. I would go with less, probably. I think that I mean, when I go to a comedy show, it's usually an improv show, because that's my favorite show in the city.
Okay.
They're all making it up all the time. But even with my stand-up, I think I care most about if it's really funny or not, and less about if it's true or not. But that might also have to do with the kind of comedy I like. Like we'll get into it a bit, I think. But I don't particularly go in for comedians making like the sort of like personal story, make you tear up kind of comedy. Isn't my brand of comedy. I don't mind that stuff, just not as comedy. I like my comedy to be funny, totally. And my inspiration to be inspiring. And never the twain shall meet.
Never the twain shall meet. Fair enough. Yeah, because there is a lot of sort of more confessional comedy, a lot more like memoir style comedy happening.
Totally. Yeah, every so often, like I like watching a comedy special, but a lot of the time I will put one on and turn it off, because I'm like, oh, this person's not really telling jokes. That's not what I was looking for.
Exactly. Yeah. Comedy specials don't necessarily have to be that much about making you laugh anymore.
No, it's like comedy special just means like there's a person on a stage with a microphone talking for an hour. That's all the comedy special is.
Exactly. Yeah, so there was an article written by Kat Rosenfield that was originally on Unheard and republished by the Free Press that was called The Lies of Trauma Merchants. And it spoke about the recent Hassan Minhaj situation and then sort of contextualized it and told a larger story beyond that. But I thought I'd start out by outlining the Hassan Minhaj situation for anyone who needs that. So there was a recent New Yorker article by Claire Malone that exposed how Hassan Minhaj has fabricated a number of hate crimes and racist incidents that have served as the bedrock for his comedic career. And Malone offered three main examples. The first one was that Minhaj claimed that an undercover working with the FBI infiltrated his mosque when he was a teenager and called the cops on him. And he even showed headlines and a picture of a specific undercover agent on screen at his shows. And this undercover was actually in prison at the time that he was supposedly infiltrating Minhaj's mosque, and he had never worked in that part of California. So that just did not happen. The second one was that Minhaj claimed that he'd been mailed an envelope of white powder that had spilled onto his daughter and that he'd had to bring her to the hospital. None of that happened. Just straight up. None of it. And the third one was that he claimed that he had been rejected on the doorstep of a girl that he'd asked to prom, and that he had to watch a white boy tie a corsage around her wrist. This also didn't happen. She had turned him down days earlier, but Minhaj actually used a blurred out picture of this real woman at his shows. And her family has actually faced years of harassment as a result. And the last one was that during his shows, he would show a bunch of just horrific, awful, violent tweets about him or that had been sent to him behind him on screen. And those were fake. He either wrote or paid someone else to write pretend hate tweets that were displayed at his show. So we all know that comedians do exaggerate and fabricate incidents for comedic effects. But for a lot of people, this felt different because Minhaj was creating these slideshows of pictures and documents and headlines and screenshots that would reasonably be interpreted by his audience as proof, right, of what had happened and that these things had happened. The other thing that people point out is that his fabrications were not crafted to enhance a joke, right? To go totally absurd and create an excellent laugh. His fabrications were more about creating a narrative about how oppressed he was as a brown Muslim American, and even that his comedy was putting him and his family's life on the line, right, with this envelope of powder. And what's sad about that, obviously, is that it casts doubt on other people's real experiences with state violence, vigilante violence, which are real things. So it's an interesting case because I think, you know, when I first saw the headline, I was like, oh, like, he's a comedian. We know that comedians, you know, have a loose relationship with the truth. But because of, you know, this sort of performance memoir style of comedy that he was doing, I think that sort of leaves more room for criticism. And especially because, you know, when he was asked about these incidents in interviews, he spoke about them as if they were factual. You know, he wrote essays about them being factual. So there really was nothing that would cause you to know that those stories were fabricated aside from this investigative article in the New Yorker that just came out.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? I do. Yeah. It does make me think. I remember watching a Bo Burnham special a few years ago. Not the most recent one, but one from earlier. And he had a few jokes in it about how his parents didn't support his comedy career, right? And they were just jokes that he told on stage. And then I remember seeing someone ask him afterwards, like, so your parents really don't like your comedy? And he immediately was just like, no, I just say that because it's funnier that way.
There you go.
To like pretend my dad rejected me. That's it's a funny bit, but my parents are really supportive, right? It's like you definitely can lie on stage and then not lie elsewhere.
Off stage, exactly. Right. So that kind of, it does speak to what Minhaj was doing was a bit different, right, than like saying things on stage and then being like, oh, that was a joke when you get off stage. He wasn't doing that with these stories.
Well, and it would be hard to do that with the stories because, like the article goes into, they're not really jokes.
No, they're not jokes. They're
you can't
horrifying.
be like, I said that because it's funny. Like you said that for a more complicated reason than it was funny.
Exactly. Well, and that's what's interesting is like Minhaj defended himself by saying that his stories reflected an emotional truth, if not factual reality. And I really want to talk about that for a second. First of all, I think it's really hilarious to say, emotionally, I felt as if my mosque was infiltrated by an FBI agent. Like, that's a very strange thing to anyways. But also...
No, I feel like an emotional truth is a truth about the emotions. It's weird to say that you had an emotional truth about a bunch of things that physically happened in the world that didn't actually happen. That doesn't seem like in the realm of emotional truth. I guess emotionally true, but even I don't know. Yeah, that's a weird sort of weasel way out of that. Some weasel words there.
That is how it feels, right? Because it's like he kind of is. It seems like he's saying, "Well, it could have happened. Well, it happened to other people." But like, if that's your definition of the truth, like, oh my gosh, like you can say anything happened to you at that point, right? And and I think like when it comes to like actual disinformation, right? The very best, most successful disinformation feels true. When you hear it, it like passes your lie detector like so easily because it sounds so plausible. It lines up with what you would expect, right?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it in that way. The like, what if the person is using the exact same tactics, but in a direction you are like more opposed to, right? Like obviously both of us are like opposed to Islamophobia or whatever, but the idea that someone could use that to stoke Islamophobia, right? Because it's emotionally true that, someone threatened me or whatever it would be, right?
Yes.
It's, if you want to like be consistent, you do have to worry about, what happens if the exact same circumstances arose around an issue that that I'd be worried about people being convinced of.
Exactly. And this kind of brings us back to Rosenfield's article because she puts this Minhaj moment in a broader context of literary fabulists, right? You've got James Frey, who wrote the best-selling memoir A Million Little Pieces, and a bunch of that was fabricated. There was J.T. Leroy, who was a drug-addicted trans sex worker, but actually was a middle-aged cis woman. You've got a real Holocaust survivor, actually, who, like, really enhanced his memoir, Herman Rosenblatt. And what Rosenfield believes is that like the reaction to Minhaj's fabrications has been very muted compared to past revelations like this. And that like the person who's pointing out the inconsistencies is much more likely to be the object of scorn as compared to the past.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I agree with this. I mean, I think the proof will be in the pudding, right? Like,
yeah, you can put a bet on it.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we should. Maybe we should gamble. Does Minhaj still have a career, right? Like, will he really be impacted by this or not? I think will tell us a lot about like whether the tide is sort of changing and whether we're all sort of accepting a looser and softer understanding of what the truth is.
Totally. Like maybe it's okay to say that it's okay to lie as long as the lie is like consistent with an ideology that I agree with.
Exactly.
Something like that. Right.
Yes. That is something that concerns me, is that the left sometimes seems to think that only the right is vulnerable to misinformation and disinformation, and that the left is much too smart and savvy to fall for disinformation. But I've seen evidence that this is not true. About a year ago, when there was the uprising in Iran, I saw this story reposted over and over and over by so many people that I follow, and it said that Iran had sentenced 15,000 dissidents to death.
Right. I think that the Prime Minister posted that and then took it down. I think he was caught up in that.
Yeah, Justin Trudeau fell for it. Justin Trudeau tweeted about it. Yes.
That's wild.
It was a hoax. The letter was forged, and the true number of people who had been sentenced to death at that time was 5.
Yeah.
But in the moment of this really horrific repression that really was happening in Iran at that time, it just felt true to people. And so it spread and spread and spread all the way to the Prime Minister's office without being caught, right?
Totally.
That's concerning.
It is concerning. And I feel like part of it too is like if it's the sort of thing you might get into like a debate or argument, like it's in a topic you might have to defend your opinion on, you want to be on solid ground and be able to pull on real examples and people putting out fake examples that can be easily dismissed hurts that ability, right? Like I'm sure there are people who have seen this guy's stand-up routine, and if they had to reach in their mind for an example of like Islamophobia that happened in modern day, they would reach to the story that they heard told in that comedy special. And it sucks for that person if they run into someone who disagrees and can be like, yeah, that didn't happen. That's not good. You want to have, I don't know, it matters whether things are true or not.
Absolutely. And honestly, like I've looked at a number of sort of, trauma hoaxers or whatever you want to call them, like people who say a hate crime happened to them, but it didn't, or they exaggerated about it. And so often they say, or people defend them by saying, well, it could have happened, or well, these things do happen, or oh, I wanted to draw attention to the fact that this happens. But it does not help to pretend that you got hate crimed when you didn't. This does not help the cause of addressing bigotry.
No, totally. And I feel like, I don't know, it made me think like, what drives this sort of thing? And I wonder how much of it is that people want to hear these stories because they want to feel like they're, not looking away, right? They're looking at the problem, they're confronting it or whatever. But they also want like charming, handsome, beautiful people who can tell the story in an entertaining way to be that messenger. Yes. Right? Like the reason that it's, because I don't know, like the ideal thing here wouldn't be that none of these stories get told. It would be that they get told by the people who it's actually happening to. Exactly. But those people might not be as charming and handsome as the messengers we get, right? And it's like those same people who feel drawn to consume this kind of media, how far are they willing to go? Right? Will they ask like an actual, like there are homeless people you could ask if you want stories about what it's like to be homeless, but would they rather watch like a TikTok by a beautiful person who used to be homeless? Or so they say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of what Rosenfield gets at, right? Is like the betrayal that we feel when a memoir turns out to be fake is that like memoirs sort of allow us to read sometimes these really salacious, possibly violent or sensational things, but we feel like we're doing it for the right reasons. We're educating ourselves, right? Right. But as soon as we find out that it's fiction, it's kind of trashy all of a sudden, right?
Oh, totally. It's just like exploitation cinema or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's just picking up a dirty novel at the used bookstore, right? Which
Yeah.
is like often a different crowd, and people feel differently about themselves than the memoir
Totally.
readers.
You
You know?
feel like, yeah, you could like feel like a good, like your English teacher would be proud of you for reading a memoir.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious if you consume that kind of media. Like, is that something you enjoy? Like the, feeling bad, where you read something that makes you feel bad, but about something that you feel good to feel bad about?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think I love it all. Like, I love true crime, dirty, gritty, wild stuff. I've been listening to a series on Coco Berthmann, who is this woman who claimed that she had been sex trafficked for the first 15 years of her life by her mother. And I won't give away the story, but there's you can check it out.
There are twists.
So yeah. So I have like I don't have standards around that. Like I also love memoirs, but
Totally.
I think, and once in a while, like I find the child misery ones are particularly like somewhat icky to me, like stories, like basically torture porn about children, where you have like the covers. Like that's not really my thing. But I kind of love. I have no qualms about sensational stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like you're not mentioning much the like righteousness of any of it. It sounds like you're mostly just in it for the thrills.
I think it's super entertaining. I think how exploitative it is can vary. But I kind of find that often there's like a self-righteousness where they're like, we're telling this to raise awareness.
Oh, totally.
And I'm like, partially sure, but let's be honest, like,
you might be telling it to sell ads on your podcast.
Exactly. Like, is the first reason that people consume true crime to raise awareness about crime? Like, I think that's not true.
Yeah, I think that is something they say to take the edge off a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually, I do depart a bit from Rosenfield here, because near the end of her article, she compares Minhaj to this TikToker who faked cancer to solicit donations online.
Right.
And because I've consumed a lot of true crime about people like cancer scammers, I think that that's like a different thing. Like a lot of times people who are willing to do a cancer scam, they lie and lie and lie for years, and they lie to get attention, and oh my gosh, they're pregnant, or they have a pregnancy loss. Like they create like an incredible amount of just chaos and stress and distress in all of the people that encounter them. And that doesn't sound like Minhaj to me. I think Minhaj is a lot more like narrow and calculated in like what his public persona is, right?
Totally.
So I think
feel like we laughed at the term before, but it sounds like the TikTok scammers are not emotionally true. They're just fully untrue in every single way, right?
Exactly. So I think like you can't put Minhaj in the same category as a cancer grifter, but I think it's still, I think the whole thing has brought up some really interesting questions about like truth and comedy. And I guess the last thing I would say on this is that I'm reading Naomi Klein's latest book, Doppelganger, right now. And she was talking about how her university students, like for a lot of them, their first exercise in personal branding is writing an application essay for university, right?
Oh, okay.
And so often it asks them implicitly to create a narrative of hardship, right?
Yeah, totally.
And that really stuck with me, that it's like there are so many pressures from so many different directions that incentivize us to heighten and intensify our worst moments, if not make them up altogether. And most of us don't go as far as like totally fabricating something, but like there really is, like we are in a moment where there are benefits to talking about your hardships, right?
Right. Yeah, your college essay that just says like my life's been pretty good. I'm captain of the soccer team. Is probably not what people are looking for.
My parents love me, and I'm just really well adjusted. Yeah, no, that's not like how you write a college essay, right?
Even though you'd hope that would be the most common story of them all. You'd hope right.
So.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think, that's the thing. When incentives change, like, we can't be altogether surprised when a very, very small minority of people take advantage of that, right? Totally. Like, it's really rare to pretend that you're indigenous. But some people do that because in very small areas like arts and culture and academia, there is a benefit to doing that.
Yeah, totally. I think it's whenever there's like I guess I kind of think of it in terms of markets sometime, right? Where if there's demand, and someone supplies the demanded item, it's so easy to just be mad at the supplier. But the demand, if there wasn't demand, probably no one would supply, right? It's
exactly.
Like there's like this demand for these like sentimental memoir comedy specials about hardship. And if you're trying to make it in comedy, you might want to try and meet that demand. And it's yeah. I mean, he's been very successful. He's very successful. So I don't know. It's hard to maybe he did everything right.
Yeah, I mean, I think right up until before that article came out, absolutely.
Yeah.
So does everything change when we have this new lens to look back on? It's an interesting question.
Okay, and one more interesting question for this section. What's your feel on should it change? Like for this specific case, if he's still on the air, a couple of years down the line, still as successful as ever, would you kind of see that as like a failure of something, or would that be fine?
I mean, I think I feel kind of neutral on it. I think that it's sort of like up to his audience and up to the general public to see like whether this falls into, an acceptable set of behaviors or not, and
right. You're more interested, not no dog in the fight, just interested to see what happens and what that might mean about things in general.
Yeah, exactly. Like if people are like, listen, he spread awareness, like he's done a great job of that, like we stand behind him, then well, there you go. There's the public's answer, Yeah. And if people are like, wow, this guy's a liar, then that'll also be interesting. What do you think? Do you have a prediction? You don't have to put down $1, but do you think that he will experience fallout from this?
No, I think he'll be fine. I mean, I am not very familiar with him, but what I've seen, he seems like a very talented, like, speaker. He seems engaging and all of that, and I don't know. I bet he'll just have one good monologue where he addresses it and move on.
There you go.
I don't know. Yeah, that would be my guess. I don't know how much I'd wager on that, but probably like $20, not 100.
Right on. Yeah, maybe he can pivot. Maybe he can, turn this into an authenticity moment.
Totally. Very possible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we missed a week, so we actually have 2 Kier Here articles to catch up on. The first or more recent one, entitled Racial Roles in Social Justice Culture, which is based on a talk I've seen you give a couple times now. And I think it's a great piece. I think anyone listening should probably read it just because if you're listening, you're probably a fan of Kier. And I think this is a pretty good origin story, or part of the origin story at least, for sort of how you got to where you are in politics right now. Yeah, totally. Good piece. It was weird to read instead of watch you present it.
Yeah. So the piece that I published was originally a talk that I gave in Portland and then in Vancouver, BC, as part of the Fucking Cancelled podcast tour. And it was one that I was nervous to give. Which was interesting because I knew that I would be talking to leftists who were some degree of skeptical about identitarianism and orthodoxy on the left. But I still felt like, ooh, maybe this is going to be a step too far, because I really talked about the racial roles that pop up within social justice culture. Because I feel like one of the main criticisms that you get if you're a white person critiquing the orthodoxy of social justice culture is that, well, you don't get it because you're white, you know. But I strongly believe that, like, the racial roles that are available to people of color are also, like, super narrow and, like, don't allow for a full human expression either. And so that's sort of what I got into. And what was really interesting was that, like, after both talks, like, I talked to people who that really resonated with, you know? Yeah.
No, totally. I mean, I was there at the Portland show, and you were pretty much surrounded until, like, the sun was well down, and like it seemed like it really resonated with a lot of people. And I could also see why you would be nervous going up there, though, because, like, just the idea of a white person giving a talk on race that isn't, like, presented with, like, guilt or shame is it's something to be nervous about. I could understand that.
Yeah, it's not a popular choice, perhaps, in this year of our Lord 2023. But it did feel right, and that's what's interesting, right? Is when you want to speak or write on something, and you're like, I know this is real, and I know that other people have experienced it, right? But there's, like, a taboo to it that really, like, makes your head spin before you kind of get it out.
Yeah, totally. But it's not like, I know we get into it a lot, the idea of, like, difference between, like, material versus, like, ideological stuff. And you giving a talk is not going to materially hurt anyone in any way. Mm-hmm. Right, like you're not doing any actual physical or financial harm to anyone by giving a talk. But if you're, you know, a believer in certain ideologies, you could be doing a ton of damage in other harder to measure ways. Right?
Exactly, the more metaphysical realm, for sure.
Yes, yeah,
and there actually even was a tweet before the Vancouver show that was like, oh, like, it's all white people talking, blah, blah. And it's interesting.
It wasn't.
It wasn't. That's the first thing. It's like Tara McGowan Ross's Mi'kmaq, and then we also had an SFU department head, or someone standing in for the head, who was a woman of color as well. But I decided to just not respond to that tweet because I was like, I'm not getting down to that level. Like, if you really do feel that an event that is only white people speaking should just never happen, like, I don't really want to get into that with you. And it's probably just not the right fit. Like, stay home. You don't have to come.
You probably wouldn't like it.
You probably wouldn't like it. So that was interesting. And I just, if people are gonna, you know, not even bother to, like, look into the people that they've decided are white. You know, they're kind of not even living up to their own standards. But there's this YouTuber I wanted to mention, Kimmy Katiti, and she commented under the essay, which I was happy to see because she is an interdisciplinary artist from Kampala, Uganda, who now lives and works in Los Angeles. And she put out a video called "This Is How I Escaped the Cult of Wokeness," which now has, I think, like 500,000 views on it. Wow. And that was, like, one of the first people of color that I saw kind of speaking out about, like, the burden of having, like, that orthodoxy in your mind and walking around, like, feeling as if everyone hated you, and interpreting every little gesture, like someone didn't open the door for you going into the grocery store, that person hates you and hates your blackness,
right.
and
yeah.
all this, and just that was so devastating, that it made it almost impossible for her to live her life at a very basic level of functioning,
right, sure.
And just caused so much misery. And the video is really interesting because for her, she went to high school, I think it was in South Africa, and learned about Desmond Tutu and how much he prioritized forgiveness, and how he found forgiveness to be a crucial piece in moving forward as a nation, you know? And so that was really something that Kimmy drew on as she was sort of making her way out of wokeness. Yeah, that just really, that's sort of what got the gears turning for me a number of years ago, thinking well, I know it sucks to be a white person in social justice culture.
Right. You had firsthand about that.
Yeah, but yeah, it's also, there are serious sort of expectations of kind of wearing your hardship on your sleeve, and kind of connecting with your culture in a public way, and being
right, yeah.
outgoing, and just there are a lot of expectations placed on people of color as well.
Yeah, and I feel like there's also just the worldview sort of that, everyone is secretly a white supremacist or whatever. Just that would weigh on you a lot, right?
It's
the
terrible.
Idea that,
yeah.
Right, that you consume media that's constantly telling you that everyone has secret biases against you that they're enacting in everything they do or whatever. That would make if you truly internalize that, I think that would make everything in life hard, because it would just make life hard to navigate, and it would make lots of problems feel impossible to deal with, because they're so out of your control, right? Because as far as you understand it, and as far as you're being told, it is out of your control, right? And there's nothing, that's just the way of the world, kind of.
Exactly. No, you're gonna have fewer opportunities. You're gonna have less kindness, fewer connections. Your life is going to be harder forever. And
yeah.
There's another video of Kimmy's where she talks about starting to skateboard in Los Angeles, and that she kind of, because of the friends that she had and the circle she was in, she kind of had a lot of fear and dread of how she would be treated by the skateboarders at the parks,
right.
Being there as a Black woman, and that she got treated well. She got treated
right.
well really consistently, and that was sort of a real kind of light bulb moment for her, where she was the reality does not match what I expected. And she even had friends who were trying to bring her back, kind of saying
right.
no, it is that bad. And
totally.
she was like,
yeah,
wait,
yeah, wondering
what?
what were the microaggressions while you were skateboarding or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And they just couldn't believe that that there weren't any, that she just had a nice time,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think that's an important piece of life, maybe. It's just the idea that isolation can be a pretty big problem in a lot of ways. I think most relationship abuse happens in relationships that are isolated, either from their community entirely, or in a very small community, and similarly, just it's when you only interact with people in some sort of in-group, it's so easy to sort of get stuck in one way of thinking about things that everyone else in your group agrees with, but that the broader world doesn't agree with, or doesn't even reflect. So yeah, it seems important, both you mentioned it in your talk, right? That a big part of your progress out of that culture was making friends who weren't part of the culture, right? Just so you had some people you could talk to and not worry about all this stuff, right? It's sort of like an escape hatch.
Yeah, exactly. I also linked in that essay to the interview I did on the Fucking Canceled podcast. And yeah, in there, like, I really talk about how, like, part of my leaving social justice culture was, like, building myself a new life to move into.
Right.
Because, yeah, it's like if all of your friends are in the subculture and, like, you know, maybe you even work a job, like if you're a social worker or a therapist or in certain lines of work, like it's going to be in your workplace as well. It's like, how do you even begin to, you know, kind of disentangle yourself? And yeah, it's like, go play street hockey, right? Like,
Totally.
Join the bird watching group.
Yeah. Go
like,
to the dog park if you have a dog. There's
go
always
to the
people at the
dog
park.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many people out there that are not in this, and a lot of them are really nice.
Totally. Yeah,
You
I think when you're in this, like, a small group like that, it can start to feel like that actually is the whole world. That, like, there isn't, like, a different group of people who never talk about this stuff, right? That everyone's always talking about it. But that's never the case. There's
Yeah.
totally people where, like, the Venn diagrams of what they discuss and what you discuss don't overlap at all, right? Who live in a totally different, like, media landscape and all of that. And it's good sometimes to reach out across those lines and just see, you know, what it's like over there. Is it better? Is it worse? Would I prefer it? Gotta stay flexible, I think. I think that's
you gotta
important.
stay flexible. Yeah. And, like, isolating oneself, you know, and thinking like, oh, I can only be friends with people that, you know, are of this identity or have this in common with me. Like, that's really, I think that's ultimately really detrimental. And
Totally.
it's
That
just,
feels like it might even be like a warning sign if you're ever, like, in a group that is hostile to reaching outside of the group.
Yeah.
I'd be worried about getting involved with any group that, like, has that sort of, you know, if you're not with us, you're with them kind of
yeah,
framing.
exactly. Well, like, Kimmy refers to wokeness as a cult, and many other people do too. I don't. I have mixed feelings about it, but I can also understand it, right? Because,
Sure.
like, yeah, you kind of are encouraged to, like, cut off family members, and, like, there are sort of a number of, like, kind of socially isolating behaviors that are encouraged if people aren't with you, right?
Yep.
If they're not, like, in the subculture with you, and that's something that's commonly happening with, like, religious converts as well, right?
Yeah, that is definitely part of being a cult, is all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm glad I'm out. I'm glad Kimmy's out, and
Totally.
yeah, here we
well,
are.
and glad you're reading books that maybe you would have been afraid to read in that period.
Yes.
Because, yeah, the other article you published since the last episode was a book review of a book called How Elites Ate the Social Justice Movement by Fredrik DeBoer.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, is this the sort of book that you think you wouldn't have read or even touched during a certain period?
Oh man, I mean, I think the title would have been really enticing to me. But yeah, I probably would have looked him up and seen if he was, like, on the good list or the bad list.
Oh, right. Because you could. Yeah, with a title like that, maybe it meant, like, that we need even more social justice movement or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
actually, I ordered this book in from through Spartacus Books, which is the local anarchist info shop,
Okay.
and they don't have it on their shelves. I needed to order it in.
Oh,
So that's the
interesting.
other thing that I just noticed, right, is that, like, that's where I went to get a lot of my books. So it's not even there.
Oh, right. You might not have even seen that it existed, because
Yeah, I
even
might not
though
have
it's, like,
found out.
directly about the sort of thing you were into, it's, like, from the wrong perspective. So
Yeah, the shop that
keep it
you would
away.
think would have it does not have it.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
yeah, but in it, like, Freddie DeBoer really argues for sort of like a class first leftism, which he differentiates from a class reductionist leftism, right? Which like, doesn't value intersectionality and maybe thinks that things like sexism and homophobia or ableism are less important than class, or that they would like fall away if we dealt with class. So that's class reductionism, and he's saying class first activism or leftism is really much more about like building a broad-based coalition across many differences, you know, that's based around our like economic interests of the vast majority of people, right? Working class people, middle class people. And that gives us the ability to do all sorts of things, to push for universal programs that benefit everyone, as well as like tackling specific issues like Black maternal mortality, for example. If you have a broad coalition of people, you have the numbers to be like, we need to get this solved, right?
Right, totally. And I think the example you mentioned for around the Black maternal mortality was the idea that like a program like Medicare for All does help with that issue, even though it's not like targeted at that issue, right? And it will be easier to build like a broad coalition for Medicare for All than like a program targeted specifically at like a minority of the population.
Yeah, and once you have like a universal healthcare system, like then like the government is responsible for healthcare. So then you can say, hey, look, government, like we need to address this inequality, you know? So yeah, I thought it was a fairly convincing read. Yeah, and it kind of got into kind of recent social movements and how they haven't been very successful at like producing like permanent material change, which I think is worth talking about.
Yeah, totally. It seems right up your alley. Just your kind of book, I think. There was one part that made me curious, probably just because it was the part with numbers in it, and I like numbers, about the nonprofit sector. Apparently the third largest employer in the United States in 2016. Ahead of finance, retail, and food service, which I did not know. And I did double check, and because part of me was like, well, third largest employer sector felt a bit like weasel wordy kind of, right? Because it's like depends on how you divide up the sectors. And nonprofit seems like a sort of weird categorization. But I checked into it, and apparently it's about 10% of the workforce works for a nonprofit.
That's
which
really
is
big.
Bigger than I expected, for sure.
Yeah, and Freddie DeBoer does get into that a little bit. He says that like, you know, certain things that we wouldn't think of as nonprofits fall into that category, right? Like volunteer fire departments, for example. So
Totally.
yeah, some of that 10% is not like your Greenpeaces or
it's not all like not all activism. Sort of
exactly. But it's still a significant sector in the country.
Yeah. Okay, and I thought that was interesting and some new information. I love new information. But then you do go on to say that it like gave you like a new perspective on the industry, maybe like a more negative one was the impression I got, which I was curious about because of the two of us, if I had to pick who prefers the profit motive, it would be me. And I think of you as someone who's like, profit motive messes up a lot of things. But in the nonprofit, I guess that comes with its own set of problems or a similar set of problems.
Well, yeah, because I think it sort of ends up being like this third arm, right? Because you have like publicly owned and operated companies or institutions, you have privately owned ones, and then you have like nonprofits who like you said, they're not motivated by the profit margin, so that seems beneficial, and they can certainly provide services. I mean, here in Canada, like we rely on nonprofits to do a lot of things. Nonprofits,
right, like the food banks, right?
All food banks, there's no government direct involvement that I know of in any food bank in Canada. So that's all done by nonprofits. Many shelters and other service providers for homeless and low-income people, that's all falls under nonprofits a lot of the time. And a friend of mine did mention that like there are significant differences between the sector in Canada and the US, which I'd like to learn more about. But the direction that Freddie DeBoer goes in is basically that like nonprofits do a couple of things to social movements. One of the things they do is they hire a lot of the most passionate, smartest, community organizers who are looking to make change. They also, and I think the finances are interesting, right? Because a lot of people donate to nonprofits so that they don't have to pay taxes. So that money is money that's being diverted from taxes, which is how we provide public services. And then basically that they sort of have like a pacifying force, right? That nonprofits are never going to like kind of challenge the government in any sort of like fundamental way, because of sort of like the limitations. First of all, like they want to continue to exist, right? That's true for almost any organization and we see that like nonprofits, a nonprofit that existed to like eradicate polio, for example, usually that won't just cease to exist. It will like transform into something else once polio is eradicated.
Because you don't want to fire everyone for succeeding. Exactly.
Yeah. So like, I don't mean to sound conspiratorial. It's not like, oh yeah, the food banks want to keep people hungry, but for them to continue to exist, like the problem that they help solve can't disappear. And so it's kind of just that there's a bit of a conflict of interest there when it comes to like change that is like at a significant enough level to like transform like something like how we deal with food security in Canada.
Interesting. So it's sort of like they're like stopgap measures sort of that you would hope that eventually the government would get around to like solving the deeper problem.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Because I was like, what, does Kira want all these things to be for profit? But you're like, no, it should all be the state. I should have guessed that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely,
totally
I believe in like the decommodification of public goods, things that people like need to survive. So I think, and as an activist, I've been involved in like nonprofits and also grassroots groups. And the thing is like grassroots groups like have no resources, right? We have no money, we have no like supplies or anything. So usually those grassroots groups have to pair with nonprofits in order to access either resources, funding, logistical support, whatever. And almost always that support also requires the grassroots group to tame things down, right? To not kind of engage in things that might be like in a legal gray area or, even like a lot of direct action would not necessarily be supported by a nonprofit that wants to like have a really good relationship with, the government. And so I definitely have sort of noticed like that relationship tends to like kind of take the teeth out of grassroots groups that sort of have larger, more ambitious demands of the government.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I could. That totally makes sense. I think. I in some ways I like that there are like facets of society that moderate the more extreme ideologies or whatever you want to call them that some groups have it, and not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, it would be great if you could not do that, but only to the issues that I'm in favor of, and still do that to the things that I don't like.
Yes, yeah. But intense and ambitious as you want around the things I support, and then make sure that you cut off all supplies to the people that are doing the things I don't like. Exactly.
That'd be great.
That's what's so interesting about like so many questions around structure and policy and like what jurisdiction things should fall under. It's like you really do have to think like, okay, what happens when the other guys get into power?
Totally. Yeah.
Right?
No, in countries like ours, it's like it's like a very institution-based system, and who is at the head of the institution changes based on elections. And so it's like any power exercised by your side can be exercised against you later if you lose an election, right? And so it's like, yeah, it would be great if a government could more easily maneuver and do big changes if it's the government you like. But in some ways, it's like I kind of prefer a slower moving system that has more checks and balances, just because I know sometimes whoever's running the thing would want to wreak tremendous havoc. And in those cases, I'd like whatever checks and balances we can get.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that type of thing reminds me of like, I was kind of surprised around the trucker convoy. I wasn't surprised that most people around me were not supportive of it. But what I was surprised is that there were a lot of people who wanted the government to like crack down hard.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I remember seeing those headlines. Maybe we should give context. There was this like anti-vax convoy that drove across Canada and then like occupied our capital, Ottawa, for like several weeks, and like shut down all of the downtown core city blocks and threw like block parties and stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that like there definitely were like extremists and conspiracy theorists involved, and then I think there were also people that had a lot of frustration and anger about the health restrictions and how they've been affected by them.
Yes, and then the government like shut down the whole protest and arrested a bunch of people,
and froze tons of bank accounts.
Froze a bunch of bank accounts. Yeah, and I mean, and now there's been like investigations into whether or not that was. I think it was they invoked the Emergencies Act, which had never before been used for shutting down a protest. And yeah, that made my tummy feel weird, because it was like, okay, I mean, this does seem like a problem. You need to have your capital, like the roads need to be open, I guess. But yeah, I don't know, giving that precedent that like if there's a big enough protest that is causing enough trouble, you can like get the RCMP to shut it down. Feels weird. Yeah, I don't love it.
Yeah, I was very surprised that I didn't see more leftists being like we should be concerned about the invoking of the Emergencies Act, because who is usually in the streets? Who is usually up against the police, right?
Totally. Yeah, it's it feels like it sort of connects to earlier, like I don't know, just like the idea of like the truth mattering, but in a different sense of like that it matters, like not just what's immediately happening, but like what it means for like the rules and regulations that we all live under.
Yeah.
That it's like you can't just like read it at face value. There's like implications to things, and whether it's like a white lie in a comedy set or like shutting down a protest that everybody hates, there could be more going on.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of want to follow things to their logical conclusion to really kind of try and understand what their effects are be, so that you can bet on it and get rich quick.
There we go. Which does transition us to Liam's quiz.
Ooh,
you don't have to bet any money, but it also has to do with the transfer of power to a ruler you might not like as much, because there is a betting market out of the United Kingdom that bets very heavily on U.S. presidential elections.
Oh wow!
It's called Betfair, and so far for the 2024 race, there's been about $7 million bet to determine the prices and the odds for a bunch of presidential candidates down south.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So I'm looking for the top 4 most likely next presidents according to this betting market. And if you want to guess a rough percent chance that you think each of them has, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to say Trump, Biden, Gavin Newsom. And I think I'm gonna have to say, oh man, I'm feeling caught between RFK Jr. and DeSantis.
Okay, you got the top 3. All right. And the order of the top 3, right? Trump is at 35%. Biden's at 33%. Newsom is at 7%, which I thought was a little surprising because, like, he's not running for president. But I guess I feel like they're pricing in maybe the chance of Biden passing away before the election and someone needing to step up to the plate. I think maybe that's where he gets his 7%. And then you missed number 4. Kennedy is at number 5. And then it's Haley and then DeSantis.
Okay. Is it Ramaswamy?
Ramaswamy's number 9 with 2%.
Oh my gosh. Who is it?
It's a wild. Is it
part of Marianne Williamson?
Nope. Part of why I like this is that it's like I do find this stuff interesting, but it's also like it's got some silliness to it. Should I spoil it, or you want to? I mean,
I think I'm out of guesses. I can't think of anyone
number
else.
4, according to the Nate Silver talks about the betting markets, and he always calls this the Scottish teenagers. According to the Scottish teenagers, the 4th most likely next president of the United States is Michelle Obama.
Okay.
5%.
All right. A bit of a wild card.
I would be surprised, but I think she's just tremendously well liked. I think she polls really well. So
I think she's got a poll like so much above Kamala Harris. Like poor Kamala Harris.
She does. Yeah, I know. She's not. She is. She's a number 8 actually. She's above Ramaswamy according to the Scottish teens at 2%.
All right.
And Elizabeth Warren also makes the list at 1%.
What about Bernie? Is Bernie just gone?
No Bernie.
No Bernie.
I mean, he might be in the other category with 4.5%, but he's not in the top 10, unfortunately.
Jeez.
For you socialists.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's what a betting market results in.
There we go. Michelle Obama, 2024. Well,
if you think that's going to happen, you can turn your money into 20 times the amount of money by betting it right now.
That sounds totally real and not at all like a bit of a scam.
I mean, it is real, but I think part of it is also just like, have you ever heard the term wish casting? Where it's like kind of forecasting, but kind of just what you're wishing for? That's what Obama strikes me as. It's just people being like, oh, it'd be cool if it was Michelle Obama. And then just betting some on that just because it would be cool.
Why not?
Yeah, you need a lot more money in the market before that sort of stuff falls out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I'm rooting for Michelle. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I got my money on Dianne Feinstein for sure.
I have some terrible news.
Well, this has been Hot Take Think Tank. Until next time.